R/petty revenge boss accused me of stealing until security camera exposed them. You need to empty your pockets. Now. I looked up from the register I was closing, my hands still full of 20s and 10s, to find assistant manager Derek Martinez standing behind me with his arms crossed and that familiar sneer plastered across his face. The last few customers of the evening were still browsing the headphone display, well within earshot. Excuse me. I kept my voice level, though my heart started hammering against my ribs. You heard me, Riley. Empty your pockets. All of them. Derek stepped closer, his voice carrying just enough to make the middle-aged woman testing out wireless earbuds glance our way. I saw you slip something into your jacket when you thought nobody was looking. This was the 4th time in 3 weeks. 4th time Derek had accused me of stealing from Technomax, the high-end electronics store where I'd worked without incident for 8 months. The first time, I'd been so shocked I'd actually complied, turning my pockets inside out like some common criminal while he watched with satisfaction. The second time, I'd asked him to be more discreet. The third time, I'd requested we handle it in the office. Now I was done playing nice. Derek, I haven't taken anything. I continued counting the register, making sure my movements were deliberate and visible. If you want to search me, we can do it in the back office with another manager present, just like company policy states. Don't quote policy to me. His voice rose another notch. The woman with the earbuds had definitely stopped pretending to shop and was now openly staring. Perfect. I'm the assistant manager here, and I'm telling you to empty your pockets. What Derek didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I'd started keeping a detailed log of every single interaction we'd had since this harassment began. Time, date, witnesses present, exact words exchanged. I'd even started using my phone's voice recorder app, keeping it running in my pocket during my shifts. Not exactly legal to record without consent in our state, but I wasn't planning to use it in court. I just needed to protect myself. And I'm telling you that I'll happily comply with a search conducted according to company guidelines. I finished counting and started preparing the deposit slip. Would you like me to call store manager Patricia down here, or would you prefer to handle this properly in the office? Derek's face flushed red. He hated when I stayed calm, hated when I didn't give him the reaction he was fishing for. You think you're so smart, don't you? Walking around here like you own the place. I think I'm an employee who's never stolen so much as a paperclip, and I'd appreciate being treated as such. The woman with the earbuds approached the counter, clearly uncomfortable but determined to complete her purchase. Derek shot me a look that promised this wasn't over and stalked away toward the gaming section, where my coworker James was helping a teenager pick out a new controller. As I processed the customer's transaction, my hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I caught a glimpse of Derek in my peripheral vision. He was standing by the accessories display, but he wasn't helping anyone. He was watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. What I didn't realize then was that Derek's obsession with catching me in some imaginary theft was about to become the key to exposing a very real crime. The formal complaint landed on my desk 3 days later. I stared at the crisp white envelope marked, confidential, HR matter, that Patricia had handed me with an apologetic grimace before retreating to her office. My name was typed across the front in official corporate letterhead, and suddenly the break room felt too small, too airless. Inside was a 2-page document detailing suspicious behavior patterns consistent with employee theft, signed by Derek Martinez and dated the evening of our latest confrontation. According to his version of events, I'd been observed pocketing merchandise on multiple occasions, had shown defensive and evasive behavior when questioned, and demonstrated concerning familiarity with company theft prevention policies suggesting premeditation. That last part almost made me laugh. Apparently knowing the employee handbook was now evidence of criminal intent. But my amusement died when I reached the bottom of the second page. Derek hadn't just filed a complaint with store management, he'd also submitted a copy to corporate loss prevention and recommended a formal investigation. The kind that could end with criminal charges if they decided to pursue it. This is insane, I muttered, reading through his accusations again. He'd even included specific dates and times, though conveniently none of his alleged observations had occurred when other managers or security cameras could corroborate them. What's insane? James dropped into the chair across from me, unwrapping a sandwich. At 19, he was 5 years younger than me but had been at Technomax almost as long. He'd also become my closest ally since Derek's harassment campaign began. I slid the complaint across the table. Derek's really going for it this time. James whistled low as he read. Dude, this is straight up character assassination. Half this stuff is complete fiction. He looked up at me with concern. Are you going to be okay? I mean, can they actually fire you over this? They can fire me for any reason they want. The real question is whether they'll press charges. I took the papers back, folding them carefully. And whether I'll be able to get another job in retail after this gets around. That was the part that kept me awake at night. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and Technomax was one of the better paying retail jobs available. If word got out that I was under investigation for theft, guilty or not, it would follow me everywhere. There has to be something we can do, James said. I mean, I work with you almost every shift. I've never seen you take anything. Never. I was about to respond when Derek walked into the break room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as his eyes landed on the complaint in my hands. Good, you got it. He grabbed an energy drink from the vending machine, making a show of counting his change afterward. I hope you understand this is nothing personal, Riley. I'm just doing my job, protecting company assets. By lying about me. By documenting what I've observed. He cracked open his drink and took a long sip. Loss prevention will be here Friday to review security footage and conduct interviews. I'm sure if you're innocent like you claim, everything will work out fine. The way he said innocent made it clear he'd already convicted me in his mind. But something else caught my attention, his eagerness to mention the security footage review. Most guilty employees would be nervous about cameras, but Derek seemed almost excited about it. That's when the first tiny seed of suspicion took root. Derek was awfully confident that the cameras would support his version of events. The question was, why? As he left the break room, whistling under his breath like he didn't have a care in the world, I made a decision. If Derek wanted to play detective, then maybe it was time I did some investigating of my own. The security footage review was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m., which gave me exactly 4 days to figure out what Derek was so confident about. I started by doing something I'd never bothered with before, actually paying attention to where the cameras were positioned throughout the store. Technomax had 8 security cameras total, 4 covering the sales floor, 2 watching the registers, 1 monitoring the stockroom entrance, and 1 in the employee break room. What I discovered during my casual reconnaissance was that there were several significant blind spots, particularly near the accessories wall and behind the customer service counter. More importantly, I realized Derek knew about these blind spots too. I'd caught him positioning himself in them during his breaks, taking phone calls where he thought nobody could see him. Thursday evening, I was restocking phone cases when I noticed something odd. Derek was working the closing shift with me and James, but he'd sent James home early, claiming we were overstaffed. That left just the 2 of us for the final hour, which never happened. Patricia was strict about the buddy system during closing procedures. I watched Derek move through his routine, noting how he kept checking his phone and glancing toward the front entrance like he was expecting someone. Around 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes before official closing time, he approached me with an expression I couldn't read. "I need you to handle the deposit tonight," he said, which was strange because the assistant manager always prepared the bank drop. "I've got some inventory counts to finish in the stockroom." "Sure," I said slowly. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Just focus on your own responsibilities, Riley." As I began the closing register procedures, Derek disappeared into the stockroom. I could hear him moving around back there, but it sounded less like counting inventory and more like he was searching for something specific. After about 10 minutes, the sound stopped entirely. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked toward the stockroom under the pretense of grabbing more deposit bags and peered around the corner. Derek wasn't counting anything. Instead, he was crouched behind a stack of television boxes, talking in hushed tones on his phone. "Told you, Friday afternoon," I heard him say. "After the loss prevention meeting, yeah, it'll all be handled by then." My blood went cold. Derek was coordinating something around the exact time of my investigation. I quickly retreated to the registers before he could spot me, but my hands were shaking as I finished counting the cash drawers. When Derek emerged from the stockroom 20 minutes later, he was carrying his usual messenger bag, but it looked bulkier than normal. He also seemed nervous for the first time since this whole thing started, checking his watch repeatedly and fumbling with his keys. "You good to finish up here?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yeah, almost done with the deposit." "Good. Lock up when you're finished. I need to head out early tonight." This was unprecedented. The assistant manager never left before the deposit was completed and the store was secured. Derek was always a stickler for protocol, except apparently when it came to falsely accusing employees of theft. After he left, I took my time finishing the closing procedures, using the extra minutes to think through what I'd observed. Derek's behavior was becoming more erratic, not less. He was planning something around my investigation meeting, and whatever it was, he was confident enough about the outcome to start getting sloppy with his own responsibilities. I was missing something crucial, some piece of the puzzle that would explain his cocky attitude about the security cameras. But as I locked the front door and walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time to figure it out. The meeting with loss prevention was less than 18 hours away, and Derek seemed to think it would be my last day at Technomax. Friday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a root canal appointment. I'd barely slept, my mind spinning through every possible scenario for the loss prevention meeting. But as I walked into Technomax at 10 a.m. for what might be my final shift, I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Derek's car wasn't in the parking lot. Patricia was behind the customer service counter looking frazzled, juggling phone calls while trying to help a customer return a defective tablet. When she saw me, relief flooded her face. "Thank God you're here early," she said, covering the phone receiver. "Derek called in sick this morning. Food poisoning, apparently. Can you cover his morning responsibilities until James gets here?" My stomach dropped. Derek was supposed to be present for the loss prevention meeting. Hell, he'd filed the complaint, how could he just not show up? "Did he say when he'd be back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "He was pretty vague. Said he'd try to make it in later if he felt better." Patricia looked skeptical. "Honestly, the timing is terrible with the LP meeting this afternoon. Corporate is not going to be happy if the reporting manager isn't available." I spent the morning in a fog of anxiety, mechanically helping customers while my brain worked overtime. Derek's absence felt calculated, not coincidental. But I couldn't figure out his angle. Was he trying to delay the investigation? Make himself look more credible by playing the dedicated employee who dragged himself to work despite being ill? Around noon, James pulled me aside during his lunch break. "Dude, I've been thinking about this Derek situation all week, and I remembered something weird." "What kind of weird?" "You know how he's always accusing you of stuff near the registers?" James glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "Well, last Tuesday when you were off, I was working the evening shift with him. I had to run to the bathroom, and when I came back, Derek was at my register. He said he was just checking that I processed a return correctly, but what? The receipt tape had advanced way more than it should have for just checking a transaction. Like, someone had run multiple entries." James lowered his voice further. "And when I counted my drawer at the end of the night, I was short $47. Derek said it was probably a counting error and that he'd handle the paperwork." The pieces started clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Did you mention the shortage to Patricia?" Derek said not to worry her with minor discrepancies. That it happened all the time. James looked uncomfortable. I was still pretty new to register work, so I figured he knew better than me. I stared at my coworker, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. "James, when exactly did Derek start accusing me of stealing?" Maybe 2 weeks after that." "Why?" "Because I think he's been setting me up." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. What if Derek's been skimming money from registers and needs a scapegoat before anyone notices the pattern? James's eyes widened. "Holy shit. You think he's been stealing and blaming you?" Before I could answer, Patricia's voice crackled over the intercom. "Riley, please come to the office. Your 2 p.m. appointment is here." My mouth went dry. The loss prevention investigator had arrived, Derek was conveniently absent, and I was about to walk into a meeting that could destroy my life based on evidence I was now convinced had been fabricated. But as I walked toward the office, passing the security camera mounted above the registers, a desperate plan began forming in my mind. If Derek had been stealing from the store, there would be evidence. And if he was confident enough about the cameras to file a formal complaint against me, maybe it was because he'd already figured out how to work around them. The question was, could I prove it before the meeting ended with my termination? I straightened my shoulders and knocked on the office door. Time to find out if I was smart enough to catch a thief who'd been trying to frame me. The loss prevention investigator looked exactly like I'd expected, mid-40s, gray suit, tired eyes that had probably seen every kind of retail scam imaginable. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb and shook my hand with the enthusiasm of someone about to perform surgery. "Please, have a seat," Patricia said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. The office suddenly felt cramped with 3 people in it. "Marcus, this is Riley Chen, the employee in question." "Ms. Chen." Webb opened a tablet and pulled up what looked like a detailed report. "I've reviewed the complaint filed by your assistant manager, Mr. Martinez. I understand he's unavailable today due to illness." "That's right," Patricia confirmed, though her tone suggested she wasn't thrilled about it either. "Derek called in this morning with food poisoning." Webb made a note. "Well, we can proceed without him for now. Ms. Chen, you've been accused of theft on multiple occasions. I'd like to hear your side of the story." I took a deep breath, acutely aware that everything I said would be documented and potentially used against me later. Mr. Martinez has been targeting me for weeks with false accusations. I've never stolen anything from this store, and I can provide detailed records of every interaction we've had. "Records?" Webb looked interested for the first time. I pulled out my phone and the notebook I'd been keeping. Timestamps, witness accounts, exact conversations. I started documenting everything after the second false accusation because his behavior seemed coordinated. Patricia leaned forward. "What do you mean, coordinated?" "He only accuses me when there are customers present, never when other managers are around. He knows exactly which camera angles to avoid. And he's always extremely confident that security footage will support his claims, which strikes me as odd for someone making good faith observations." Webb was typing rapidly. "That's an interesting perspective. However, Mr. Martinez has provided specific dates and times when he alleges he observed suspicious behavior. We'll need to review the corresponding security footage." "I welcome that review," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. "But I'd also like to request that you examine footage from dates when I wasn't working." "Excuse me." This was my gamble, the theory I'd been forming since James's revelation. If someone has been skimming cash from registers, the shortages wouldn't just happen on days when I was present. "I think you'll find a pattern of discrepancies that extends beyond my work schedule." Patricia looked genuinely surprised. "Riley, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you should check Derek's activity around the registers more carefully. Especially on days when newer employees like James were working alone with him." Webb set down his stylus. "Those are serious accusations, Ms. Chen. Do you have evidence to support them?" "James mentioned a $47 shortage from his register 2 weeks ago. Derek told him not to report it and handled the paperwork himself." I met Webb's gaze directly. "That was right before the theft accusations against me started." "That could be coincidental," Patricia said, but I could see doubt creeping into her expression. "Maybe. But I'll bet if you pull Derek's personnel file, you'll find he's worked at other retail locations before this one. And I'll bet if you contact those employers, you'll discover some interesting patterns." Webb was quiet for a long moment, studying his tablet screen. Finally, he looked up. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to be honest with you. The complaint against you is quite detailed, and normally we'd focus our investigation accordingly. However, your counter-accusations raise some valid points that warrant examination." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we're going to expand this investigation beyond just your activities. I'll be reviewing several weeks of footage, not just the dates Mr. Martinez specified." Webb closed his tablet. "I'll also be examining register reconciliation reports and speaking with other employees." Patricia rubbed her temples. "How long will this take?" "At least through the weekend, possibly longer. In the meantime, Ms. Chen, you'll remain on the schedule but won't handle cash transactions until this is resolved." As we filed out of the office, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. I bought myself time, but I'd also escalated the situation dramatically. If I was wrong about Derek, I just made everything infinitely worse for myself. But as I watched Patricia pull James aside for what looked like a very serious conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd finally started asking the right questions. The only problem was, Derek still had the weekend to cover his tracks. Saturday morning, I was scheduled for an opening shift that felt like walking into a minefield. Derek had miraculously recovered from his food poisoning and was already behind the customer service counter when I arrived, looking perfectly healthy and insufferably smug. "Riley," he called out with fake cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. "Feeling better about yesterday's meeting?" I heard it went interesting. Patricia must have briefed him on the investigation's expansion. The fact that he seemed pleased rather than concerned told me everything I needed to know about his confidence level. "It went fine," I replied evenly, heading toward the stockroom to grab my name tag from my locker. Derek followed me, which immediately set off alarm bells. "You know, I've been thinking about our situation," he said, leaning against the doorframe to block my exit. "Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe there's a way to resolve this whole misunderstanding without involving corporate any further." I turned to face him fully. "What kind of resolution did you have in mind?" "Well, people make mistakes. Sometimes they take things without really thinking about it, you know. And sometimes those things could just reappear. No questions asked." His smile was predatory. I'd hate for a good employee to lose their job over something minor. The audacity was breathtaking. Derek was actually trying to get me to confess to crimes I hadn't committed while simultaneously offering to make evidence disappear. Evidence that, if it existed, he would have had to plant himself. "That's a generous offer," I said carefully, "but I can't return something I never took." His expression hardened. "That's unfortunate. Because I have a feeling Webb's investigation is going to turn up some very compelling evidence. Security cameras can be quite revealing. Yes, they can. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Especially when they capture things the person being recorded doesn't realize they're showing. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Derek's face. Then his cocky mask snapped back into place. We'll see about that. Enjoy your shift, Riley. What's left of your employment here, anyway? As he walked away, I realized with growing horror that Derek wasn't just confident about the investigation, he was actively manipulating it. His offer to make evidence reappear suggested he had access to stolen merchandise that he could plant in my locker, my car, or anywhere else that would damn me. The morning dragged by with Derek hovering nearby, watching my every move with the intensity of a hawk circling prey. Every time I organized inventory or helped a customer, I felt his eyes on me, cataloging everything for some future narrative. Around noon, James pulled me aside during his break, his face pale with worry. Dude, something weird happened when I got here this morning, he whispered. I came in through the back entrance, and I saw Derek's car in the parking lot, but all the lights were off in the store. Like, he'd been here for a while before opening. My blood chilled. How long before opening? At least an hour, maybe more. His car was there when I drove by on my way to grab coffee at 7 a.m., but we don't open until 10. James glanced around nervously. Why would he be here that early on a weekend? Patricia doesn't even get in until 9:30. I felt the walls closing in. Derek had spent unsupervised time in the store this morning, with full access to security cameras, registers, inventory, and employee lockers. Whatever he was planning, he'd just set it in motion. James, I need you to do something for me, I said urgently. When you count your register tonight, document everything. Take pictures of your count sheets, your deposit slip, everything. And if Derek offers to help with any paperwork, politely decline. You really think he's setting us up? Before I could answer, Derek's voice boomed across the store, Riley. Customer needs help in mobile accessories. As I walked toward the accessories wall, conveniently located in one of the camera blind spots Derek knew so well, I realized that this wasn't just about theft anymore. This was about survival. And Derek was playing for keeps. The customer in mobile accessories turned out to be a middle-aged man looking for a specific phone case, a simple transaction that should have taken 5 minutes. But as I helped him compare options, I noticed Derek positioning himself at the end of the aisle, pretending to straighten merchandise while clearly eavesdropping on our conversation. This one's nice, the customer said, holding up a leather wallet case. But it seems pretty expensive for what it is. Let me check if we have any current promotions, I replied, pulling out the store tablet to access our deals database. As I scrolled through the offers, Derek suddenly appeared at my shoulder. Actually, let me handle this, he said smoothly, taking the tablet from my hands before I could protest. Riley, why don't you go help Patricia with the shipment that just came in? The customer looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Derek's smile was plastered on so tight it looked painful, but his eyes were cold as winter. I was just checking for discounts, I said. And I said I'll handle it. Derek's voice carried an edge that made the customer take a step back. The shipment needs to be processed immediately. I had no choice but to comply without making a scene in front of a customer. As I walked toward the stockroom, I caught Derek watching me in the security mirror mounted in the corner. He was definitely up to something, and whatever it was, he needed me away from the sales floor to do it. Patricia wasn't in the stockroom when I arrived, and there was no urgent shipment waiting to be processed. Just the usual boxes of inventory we'd received yesterday, already sorted and ready to be stocked. I spent a few minutes moving things around to make it look like I'd been working, then crept back toward the stockroom entrance to listen. I could hear Derek's voice carrying from the accessories section, but he was no longer talking to the customer. Instead, he seemed to be on his phone again, speaking in the same hushed tones I'd overheard Thursday night. I know it's moving fast, but we need to close this today, he was saying. The investigation won't stay focused on her much longer if we don't give them something concrete. Yes, I'm handling it now. My hand started shaking. Derek wasn't just confident about framing me, he was working with someone else. But who? And what were they planning to plant as evidence? I pulled out my phone and started recording, even though I knew it probably wouldn't be admissible in any official proceeding. At this point, I just needed something, anything, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The web guy seems thorough, Derek continued, but he's still focused on the original timeline. If we stick to the plan, she'll be gone by Monday and this whole thing disappears. No one suspects anything. She's been isolated from cash handling, so when the missing inventory shows up in her stuff, it'll look like she was branching out into merchandise theft too. My stomach lurched. Missing inventory in my stuff. Derek was going to plant stolen merchandise somewhere connected to me, my locker, my car, maybe even my apartment if he was desperate enough. I heard footsteps approaching the stockroom and quickly shoved my phone back into my pocket, grabbing a random box to look busy. But it wasn't Derek who appeared in the doorway. It was Marcus Webb, the loss prevention investigator, and he looked grim. Ms. Chen, I need to speak with you immediately, he said. We've discovered some irregularities in yesterday's register reconciliation that require your immediate attention. Behind him, I could see Derek hovering near the stockroom entrance, his face a mask of concerned professionalism. But his eyes were gleaming with triumph. Whatever he'd planted, whatever evidence he'd manufactured during his early morning visit to the store, Webb had found it. And I was about to become the prime suspect in my own framed job. Webb led me to the office with the kind of deliberate pace that suggested he was giving me time to confess before we got there. My mind raced through everything Derek could have planted during his early morning visit. Missing cash was one thing, but he'd mentioned inventory on his phone call. Physical merchandise would be harder to explain away. Mr. Webb, I said as we walked, before we discuss any irregularities, I need to tell you something important about what I just overheard. He held up a hand. Ms. Chen, I prefer to address the immediate evidence first. Then we can discuss any additional concerns you might have. Patricia was waiting in the office, her expression unreadable. On her desk sat a small cardboard box labeled with yesterday's date and my employee ID number. My heart sank as I recognized it as one of the deposit boxes we used for end-of-day register reconciliation. Yesterday's closing procedures show some significant discrepancies, Webb began, opening his tablet. According to the documentation, you were responsible for the final register counts and deposit preparation. That's correct. Derek asked me to handle the deposit while he finished inventory counts in the stockroom. Yes, Mr. Martinez mentioned that. Webb pulled a receipt tape from the box. However, when we examined your register activity from yesterday evening, we found several voided transactions that weren't properly documented. Transactions totaling $234. I stared at the receipt tape, my mouth going dry. I didn't void any transactions yesterday. The register was clean when I finished the count. The timestamp shows these voids occurred at 8:47 p.m. during your closing procedures. Patricia consulted her own notes. Derek's timesheet shows he was in the stockroom from 8:30 to 9 p.m., which would corroborate his story about doing inventory. Because he told me he was doing inventory. The words came out sharper than I intended. But I heard him on the phone back there, not counting anything. Webb exchanged a glance with Patricia. Ms. Chen, these are serious allegations. Do you have any proof that Mr. Martinez was on the phone rather than working? I thought about the recording on my phone, but that conversation had happened today, not yesterday. And even if I played it for them, Derek could claim he was talking to a vendor or discussing legitimate business. The timestamps can be manipulated if someone has manager access to the register system, I said desperately. Derek could have processed those voids after I left and backdated them to make it look like I did it. That would require his personal login credentials, Patricia pointed out. Every transaction is tied to a specific employee ID. My blood turned to ice. What employee ID shows on those voided transactions? Webb consulted his tablet. Yours. Employee ID 2847. The room started spinning. Derek hadn't just planted evidence, he'd somehow gained access to my login credentials and used them to create fraudulent transactions. But how? I was always careful with my password, never wrote it down, never shared it with anyone. Then I remembered Thursday night, when Derek had insisted I handle the deposit while he worked in the stockroom. He'd sent James home early, leaving just the two of us. And he'd been acting strange, checking his phone constantly, watching me work the register. I need to check something, I said, pulling out my employee handbook. What time do the system logs show my last legitimate transaction yesterday? Webb scrolled through his data. 8:31 p.m. A customer purchase for wireless earbuds. And what time did I clock out? 8:52 p.m. I flipped to the employee policy section and found what I was looking for. Company policy requires all employees to clock out within 5 minutes of their last transaction unless they're handling deposits or cleaning duties. The system automatically logs any employee who exceeds that window. Patricia frowned. What's your point? My point is that if I had processed voids at 8:47, I would have been logged as having extended register activity. But if someone else used my credentials after I clocked out, the system would show a gap. I looked directly at Webb. Can you check if there are any administrative overrides or login anomalies around that time? Webb's fingers moved across his tablet screen. After a long moment, his expression shifted from skeptical to concerned. There's a manager override logged at 8:55 p.m., he said slowly. 3 minutes after your clockout time. Whose override code? Webb's jaw tightened as he read the screen. Derek Martinez. And according to this, he accessed your employee profile immediately after the override. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus, I think we need to have a very different conversation with Derek. The satisfaction of watching Webb's expression change from suspicion to alarm was short-lived. Because as we sat there processing the implications of Derek's unauthorized access to my employee profile, Patricia's desk phone rang with the shrill urgency that always meant trouble. Technomax, this is Patricia, she answered, her voice still shaky from our revelation. I watched her face cycle through confusion, then shock, then something approaching panic. What do you mean he's not? Yes, I'll hold. Webb and I exchanged glances while Patricia pressed the phone to her chest. That was corporate security. They're trying to reach Derek for a follow-up interview, but the phone number on his employment application has been disconnected. When they tried his emergency contact, the woman who answered said she'd never heard of him. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means, Webb said grimly, pulling up something new on his tablet, that I should have run a more thorough background check from the beginning. His fingers flew across the screen. I can access our database remotely, here we go. Derek Martinez, hired 8 months ago, previous employment at Electronics Depot in Riverside. That's 2 hours from here, Patricia noted. Yes, and according to their records, Derek Martinez left Electronics Depot under investigation for inventory discrepancies totaling over $3,000. Webb looked up at us with the expression of someone who just realized they'd been played. The investigation was dropped when he voluntarily resigned and the missing merchandise mysteriously reappeared in their stockroom. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. Derek had done this before. He'd perfected a system of theft and frame jobs, probably moving from store to store across the region. The reason he was so confident about the security cameras, so sure about the investigation's outcome, was because he orchestrated identical scenarios multiple times. We need to find him immediately, I said, standing up so fast my chair rolled backward. If he knows you're expanding the investigation, he's probably already planning his exit strategy. Patricia hung up the phone with more force than necessary. Corporate can't reach him, but his car is still in our parking lot. James said he saw Derek about 20 minutes ago in the gaming section. Webb was already heading for the door. Ms. Chen, I owe you an apology, but it'll have to wait. Right now I need to secure any evidence before. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow, but the implications were immediate and terrifying. Someone with manager access had triggered the store's security lockdown system. The electronic locks on all exits would have engaged automatically, the registers would have gone into protected mode, and the security cameras. The cameras just went dark, Webb confirmed, staring at his tablet screen. Someone initiated a full system reset. Patricia grabbed her master keys. Only Derek and I have the codes for emergency lockdown. This has to be him. We rushed out of the office to find the main sales floor empty except for James, who was standing by the registers looking confused and frightened. The few customers who'd been browsing had been escorted out through the emergency exits, their alarms still echoing faintly through the building. "Where's Derek?" I called to James. "He said there was a gas leak and made everyone leave," James shouted back over the alarm noise. "But Riley, that's not the weird part. Right before the lights went out, I saw him wheeling one of the big inventory carts toward the back exit. It was covered with a tarp." Webb cursed under his breath. "He's stealing everything he can carry before he disappears." "The back exit leads to the loading dock," Patricia said, fumbling with her keys. "If he disabled the alarms, he could load his car without anyone noticing." As we ran toward the rear of the store, I realized Derek's final play was more sophisticated than simple theft. By triggering the lockdown and clearing the store, he created the perfect cover story. When investigators eventually sorted through the chaos, missing inventory could easily be blamed on the emergency evacuation, or better yet, on the employee who'd been under investigation for theft. Even now, Derek was still trying to frame me. The only difference was that this time, I had witnesses who knew the truth. The question was whether we could catch him before he vanished with the evidence of his crimes and left me holding the bag for everything. We burst through the stockroom toward the loading dock, Patricia's keys jangling as she tried to find the right one for the back door. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish shadows, and the distant wail of the security alarm made it feel like we were running through a nightmare. "There." James pointed through the small window in the back door. Derek's car was backed up to the loading dock, trunk open, and he was frantically loading boxes from what looked like our highest-end merchandise. Wireless speakers, tablets, gaming systems, easily $10,000 worth of inventory disappearing into his sedan. But what made my blood freeze wasn't the theft itself. It was what I could see scattered around his car, empty boxes with my employee discount stickers still attached, and what looked like my Technomax jacket draped over his passenger seat. "He's not just stealing," I whispered. "He's planting evidence to make it look like I was his accomplice." Webb was already on his phone with what I assumed was real law enforcement, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. "Suspect is actively removing merchandise from the premises. Yes, we have visual confirmation. Back exit of Technomax on Fletcher Avenue." Patricia finally got the door unlocked, but as she pushed it open, Derek looked up from loading his car. For a split second, our eyes met through the gap, and his expression shifted from panic to something much more dangerous. Instead of running, Derek reached into his car and pulled out what looked like a crowbar. Then he started walking deliberately toward the building, his face set with the kind of desperate determination that meant he decided to fight his way out rather than flee. "Get back inside," Webb ordered, pushing us away from the door. "Now." But it was too late. Derek had reached the loading dock and was using the crowbar to jam the door mechanism. The metallic scraping sound echoed through the stockroom as he wedged it in place, effectively trapping us inside while he finished whatever he was planning. "There has to be another way out," James said, his voice tight with panic. "Emergency exits in front, but those trigger the fire department response," Patricia replied. "The whole building will be swarming with first responders in 10 minutes. Through the small window, I could see Derek moving with renewed urgency. But he wasn't loading more merchandise. Instead, he was pulling items out of boxes and throwing them onto the ground around the loading dock, creating a scene that would look like a panicked employee had dropped evidence while trying to escape. "He's staging a crime scene," I realized out loud. "When the police get here, it's going to look like I was stealing with him and something went wrong." Webb was still on his phone, but I could hear the frustration in his voice as he tried to explain the complex situation to dispatch. "How do you quickly summarize that the reporting manager is actually the thief, the accused employee is innocent, and everything is happening in reverse of what the initial complaint suggested?" Then I heard something that made my heart stop, the sound of Derek's car doors slamming shut. Not just the driver's door, multiple doors. "Did anyone else see Derek arrive this morning?" I asked urgently. James shook his head. "Just his car in the parking lot early." "Why?" I pressed my face to the window, trying to get a better view of the sedan. The windows were tinted, but I could make out shapes in the passenger seat. Derek hadn't been working alone, he'd brought help for his final theft, people who'd been waiting in his car while he set up the frame job. And now we were trapped in a building with a sophisticated crew of thieves who had nothing left to lose. The sound of the crowbar hitting the door again echoed through the stockroom, but this time it wasn't jamming the mechanism. Someone was trying to break back inside. The crowbar strikes against the door grew more violent, accompanied by voices I didn't recognize. Derek had definitely brought backup, and they were trying to get back inside the building. But why? He'd already loaded his car with merchandise, what more could he want? "The security system," Patricia whispered, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "When Derek triggered the lockdown, it automatically backed up all the day's transactions to corporate servers. If he leaves now, there's a digital trail of everything he did." Webb looked up from his phone. "What kind of trail?" "Every override, every transaction void, every time he accessed employee records, it's all timestamped and stored off-site." Patricia's voice was getting stronger as she worked through the implications. "He can't just disappear anymore. Corporate will have documentation of his unauthorized access to Riley's credentials." The pounding on the door stopped abruptly, replaced by an ominous silence that somehow felt worse than the noise. I pressed my ear to the metal, trying to figure out what they were planning next. "Can you hear anything?" James asked. Before I could answer, the building's fire suppression system suddenly activated. Not the sprinklers, the halon gas system designed to protect our expensive electronics inventory. The chemical smell hit immediately, and I realized with growing horror that Derek had found a way to trigger it remotely. "Everyone cover your faces," Webb ordered, pulling his shirt up over his nose and mouth. "Halon displaces oxygen. We need to get out of here now." But the back door was still jammed, and the gas was pumping through the ventilation system faster than I'd expected. My eyes started watering, and I could feel my breathing becoming labored. Derek wasn't just trying to destroy evidence anymore, he was trying to incapacitate us long enough to complete whatever his endgame was. "The customer service office has an external phone line," Patricia gasped through her improvised mask. "If we can reach it, we can call for help without using the building's compromised systems." We stumbled through the stockroom toward the sales floor, the halon gas making everything hazy and surreal. The emergency lighting flickered intermittently, casting moving shadows that made it difficult to navigate around inventory displays. That's when I heard the sound that made everything click into place, the distinct electronic beep of our cash registers powering back up. He's not trying to escape, I realized, grabbing Webb's arm. He's buying time to access the register system and delete the evidence of what he did to my employee profile. Derek had realized that simply running wouldn't be enough. The digital trail Patricia mentioned would eventually lead investigators back to him, no matter where he went. But if he could erase the login records and transaction logs, he could still make it look like I had been the one stealing all along. The server room is behind customer service, Patricia wheezed. If he gets physical access to our local backup drives. She didn't need to finish. Derek could wipe months of evidence, not just about his framed job against me, but probably about other thefts he'd been committing since he started working here. James's mysterious cash shortage, inventory discrepancies that had been blamed on shipping errors, customer complaints about missing accessories, it could all disappear. Through the haze, I could see lights moving near the front of the store. Derek and his accomplices had found another way inside, and they were working methodically toward the server room. The halon gas was getting thicker, and I could feel my strength fading. But as I watched those lights moving through our store, destroying evidence and preparing to destroy my life, I realized something that gave me a surge of desperate energy. Derek had made one critical mistake in his perfect plan. He'd assumed I would panic. Instead, I was getting angry. The halon gas was making everything feel dreamlike and sluggish, but my mind was suddenly crystal clear. Derek's mistake wasn't just assuming I'd panic, it was triggering a system lockdown that worked both ways. If we couldn't get out easily, neither could he and his crew once the real police arrived. How long does the halon system run? I asked Patricia, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chemical burn in my throat. 7 minutes maximum, she gasped back. Then it cycles off automatically to prevent asphyxiation. Webb checked his phone. Police ETA is 4 minutes. Fire department right behind them. Through the haze, I could see the lights at the front of the store had stopped moving. Derek and his accomplices had reached the customer service area, but something was wrong with their plan. I could hear frustrated voices and what sounded like someone kicking equipment. The server room, Patricia whispered with sudden realization. It has its own independent lockdown system. When the halon triggers, it seals automatically to protect the drives from contamination. A bitter laugh escaped my throat despite everything. Derek's own security lockdown had locked him out of the very system he was trying to access. He trapped himself in a building filled with evidence of his crimes, with law enforcement minutes away, and no way to destroy the digital trail that would expose him. But Derek apparently wasn't giving up. The frustrated voices at the front of the store were getting louder, and I could hear what sounded like crowbars attacking metal again. If he couldn't delete the evidence electronically, maybe he was planning to physically destroy the servers. We need to get closer, I said, surprising myself. If he's going to trash the server room, we need to document it. Riley, that's insane, James protested. The gas is almost finished cycling, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. And Webb needs evidence of tampering for his investigation, right? Webb looked at me with something that might have been respect. If you can get video of them damaging store property while attempting to destroy evidence, it would strengthen the case considerably. The halon system chose that moment to shut off with a mechanical wheeze, and immediately the air started clearing. Emergency ventilation kicked in, pulling the chemical haze toward the roof vents. Within 30 seconds, I could see across the sales floor again. What I saw made my blood run cold. Derek hadn't brought just 1 or 2 accomplices, there were at least 4 people systematically destroying our store. They'd given up on subtle evidence tampering and were now smashing anything that might contain digital records. Registers, tablets, the customer service computer, even our security camera recording equipment. But they'd made another critical error. In their desperation to destroy evidence, they were creating new evidence. Every swing of their crowbars, every kicked-in display, every scattered piece of merchandise was going to be photographed and cataloged by investigators. They're not trying to cover their tracks anymore, Webb observed grimly. They're trying to create so much chaos that the original investigation gets lost in the mess. I started recording on my phone, making sure to capture the systematic destruction and Derek's face as he coordinated the vandalism. But as I moved closer to get better angles, I noticed something that made my heart race. One of Derek's accomplices was carrying a gas can. They weren't just planning to destroy evidence and disappear. They were going to burn down the entire store, with us still inside it, and make it look like an electrical fire caused by the system lockdown. The sound of sirens was getting closer, but I wasn't sure they'd arrive in time to stop Derek's final, desperate solution. The gas can changed everything. This wasn't just about theft or evidence tampering anymore, Derek was planning to commit arson with potential casualties. I had to warn Webb and the others, but I also couldn't let Derek's crew finish dousing the store in accelerant. Webb, I hissed, grabbing his arm and pointing toward the figure with the gas can. They're going to torch the place. His face went white as he watched Derek's accomplice begin splashing liquid around the base of our main electronics display. The smell of gasoline started mixing with the lingering halon fumes, creating a cocktail that made my head spin. Everyone stay low and move toward the emergency exit, Webb whispered urgently. We need to get out and let the fire department handle this. But as we started crawling between the display racks, staying below Derek's sight lines, I realized we had a bigger problem. The emergency exits were positioned right next to where they were pouring gasoline. We'd have to cross directly through their operation to reach safety. There has to be another way, James whispered, his voice tight with fear. Patricia pointed toward the far corner of the store. The receiving dock has a manual override, but someone would have to get to the electrical panel behind customer service. The electrical panel was maybe 30 feet from where Derek was coordinating his crew's destruction, well within their line of sight. It might as well have been on the moon. I can make it, I said before I could think better of it. They're focused on the server room and don't know exactly where we are. Absolutely not, Webb replied immediately. We wait for backup. The sirens were definitely getting closer, but Derek had heard them too. I watched him gesture frantically at his crew, and their movements became more urgent. The person with the gas can started moving toward our side of the store, creating what looked like a trail leading from the electronics section toward the stockroom. They were setting up an accelerant path that would trap us in the back of the building when they lit it. We're out of time, I said, pulling out my phone again. I'm going to create a distraction while someone gets to that electrical panel. What kind of distraction? Patricia asked. I held up my phone, making sure the video recording was still running. I'm going to give Derek exactly what he's been wanting all along, a confrontation. But this time, it's going to be documented. Before anyone could stop me, I stood up from behind the tablet display and stepped into full view of Derek's operation. Having trouble with the security system, Derek? The effect was immediate and exactly what I'd hoped for. All four figures froze, then turned toward me with expressions ranging from shock to rage. Derek's face contorted with fury as he realized I'd been watching and recording their entire criminal enterprise. You should have taken the deal when I offered it, he snarled, abandoning any pretense of professionalism. Now you get to burn with the evidence. What deal was that? The one where I confessed to crimes you committed? I kept my voice steady, making sure my phone was capturing everything. Like those fraudulent transactions you processed with my stolen credentials. Derek's accomplices looked confused, glancing between him and me as they tried to figure out what was happening. I realized they probably thought I was his partner in the thefts, not his intended scapegoat. She's lying, Derek told them, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. She's been stealing from day one. Then why are you destroying the evidence instead of letting it speak for itself? I called back. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the crash of the front doors being forced open and authoritative voices shouting, "Police." Everyone on the ground. But Derek's crew panicked at the sound of law enforcement, and the person with the gas can dropped it, spilling accelerant across a wide area near the electrical displays. All it would take was one spark from damaged wiring to turn our standoff into an inferno. The dropped gas can created a spreading pool of accelerant that was creeping dangerously close to the sparking remains of a smashed tablet display. I could see tiny electrical arcs dancing where Derek's crew had damaged the power cables, and the acrid smell of gasoline was getting stronger by the second. "Nobody move," one of the police officers shouted from the front entrance, but his command came too late. Derek's accomplices were already scattering in different directions, their panic overriding any sense of self-preservation. The worst part was watching Derek himself. Instead of surrendering or running like his crew, he pulled out what looked like a lighter and held it up where everyone could see it. "You want to know the truth about your precious employee?" he yelled toward the police officers, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's been helping me steal from this place for months. Check her locker, check her car, it's all there." Even now, even with law enforcement watching him hold an open flame near gasoline fumes, Derek was still trying to frame me. The audacity would have been impressive if it wasn't so terrifying. "Derek, put the lighter down," I called out, keeping my phone recording even as my hands shook. "You've already lost. The server logs show everything, the stolen credentials, the fraudulent transactions, all of it. Those logs are about to disappear," he snapped back, taking a step closer to the expanding puddle of gasoline. "Along with your lies." But I could see uncertainty flickering across his face. The police presence had changed the dynamic completely, and his backup plan of destroying evidence through arson was looking increasingly desperate rather than clever. That's when Webb made his move. While Derek was focused on me and the approaching officers, the loss prevention investigator had circled around through the gaming section and was now positioned behind Derek with a clear path to tackle him. "Marcus, don't," I warned, spotting the gasoline vapors shimmering in the air between them. "The fumes are too thick." But Webb was already moving, lunging toward Derek in a desperate attempt to knock the lighter away before he could ignite anything. The tackle connected, sending both men crashing into a display of phone chargers, but the lighter went flying in a spinning arc that seemed to last forever. I watched it tumble through the air, still lit, heading directly toward the largest concentration of spilled gasoline. Time slowed to a crawl as I realized there was nothing anyone could do to stop what was about to happen. The lighter hit the floor and skittered across the tile, its flame dancing dangerously close to the accelerant. But instead of the explosion I expected, there was just a small puff of blue flame that died out almost immediately. The gasoline hadn't ignited. "Safety lighter," one of the police officers called out with obvious relief. "Flame goes out if you're not holding the button down." Derek's face crumpled as he realized his final desperate gambit had failed due to a basic safety feature. Webb was already restraining him while officers moved in to secure the scene, but I could see Derek's mind still working, still searching for some way to shift blame onto me. "Check her employee records," he kept repeating as they cuffed him. "Check her locker. She's been planning this longer than I have." Even as his own crew was being arrested around him, even with video evidence of him attempting arson, Derek couldn't let go of the narrative he'd constructed. In his mind, I was still the villain and he was still the hero trying to expose me. But as I looked around at the destroyed store, the arrested accomplices, and the growing crowd of first responders, I realized Derek had finally made a mistake he couldn't blame on someone else. He'd revealed exactly who he really was. The aftermath unfolded like a carefully orchestrated vindication. As Derek and his crew were loaded into police cars, still protesting their innocence and pointing fingers at me, Webb pulled me aside with an expression I'd never seen from him before, genuine remorse mixed with professional respect. "Ms. Chen, I owe you more than an apology," he said, consulting his tablet one final time. "The preliminary server analysis shows systematic credential theft going back 6 months, register manipulation totaling over $15,000, and inventory discrepancies that perfectly match Mr. Martinez's work schedule." I watched through the store windows as Derek continued his frantic gesturing from the back of a patrol car, still trying to convince anyone, that this was all an elaborate setup. The desperation on his face would have been pathetic if his schemes hadn't nearly destroyed my life. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly feeling exhausted as the adrenaline finally started to fade. Now you're completely exonerated, and Mr. Martinez faces federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, arson attempt, and about 6 other felonies. Webb's expression hardened as he looked toward the patrol cars. We also found similar patterns at his previous 3 employers. "You weren't his first victim." Patricia appeared at my elbow, looking simultaneously relieved and mortified. "Riley, I can't begin to express how sorry I am. Corporate has already approved a promotion to assistant manager, a substantial raise, and full compensation for the stress you've endured." The promotion felt surreal. 3 hours ago, I'd been facing potential criminal charges and career destruction. Now I was being offered the job of the person who tried to frame me. There was a poetic justice to it that wasn't lost on me. I'd like James promoted too, I said, surprising myself. He was instrumental in exposing the truth, and he's earned it. James, who'd been hovering nearby looking shell-shocked, broke into the biggest grin I'd ever seen. Seriously? Assistant manager. Co-assistant manager, Patricia corrected with a smile. We're restructuring to make sure something like this never happens again. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Derek's operation became clear. He'd been running the same scam across multiple states, targeting younger employees with clean records who'd be believable fall guys. The merchandise in his car was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators found storage units full of stolen electronics, fake documentation for resale, and detailed profiles of employees he'd been grooming as potential scapegoats. The most satisfying part came a month later, when I received a call from Webb informing me that Derek had finally dropped his claims about my involvement. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of his own accomplices, he'd accepted a plea deal that would keep him in federal prison for the next 8 years. He asked me to pass along a message, Webb said, and I could hear the irony in his voice. He said to tell you that you were better at this than he expected. I hung up laughing. Even in defeat, Derek couldn't resist one final attempt at manipulation, trying to make it sound like I'd somehow outsmarted him in a game we were both playing. The truth was simpler, I just refused to be the victim he needed me to be. 6 months later, I still work at Technomax, now as the senior assistant manager overseeing loss prevention protocols. Every new employee gets trained on recognizing workplace harassment and knows they have multiple channels to report suspicious behavior. The security cameras have been upgraded, the computer systems have better access controls, and we've implemented buddy system procedures that make it much harder for anyone to work alone with sensitive systems. Derek Martinez became a cautionary tale, but more importantly, he became a closed chapter. Sometimes the best revenge really is just refusing to let someone else write your story.